I'd like to introduce my panel of food industry change makers. Rebecca Mayhew, next to me, of Old Hall Farm, is a former land agent who in 2016 joined her husband in their family farm business, and together they converted their intensive pig farm to a dairy farm after falling in love with the idea of having their own herd of Jersey cattle. Edd Lees is a co-founder of Wildfarmed, the consumer brand producing bread and flour based on crops grown regeneratively. He brings over 20 years of experience in financial markets and left his job as global co-head of a derivatives business to start the Wildfarmed business. Josiah Meldrum is co-founder of Hodmedods, the consumer food brand retailing pulses and legumes grown by a network of 40-plus farmers. Hodmedods provides agroecological advice to each farmer in its supplier network so they can produce their crops in a healthier and more sustainable manner. Some would say regeneratively, but this is a term that Josiah avoids. He will explain this in due course on stage. Hamish Anderson is the CEO of Tate Enterprises, heading up Tate's commercial portfolio, which includes the museum's cafes and restaurants, events, e-commerce, and publishing, plus loads more, which I'm not going to enumerate this evening. Being the former wine columnist of The Telegraph, he has grown Tate's renowned wine cellars, and specific to our discussion tonight, he helped create Tate's coffee roasting business in 2012, Coffee by Tate, which boasts an industry-leading sourcing program based on gender equality. And now, because we have a large amount to cover, we're going to begin our panel discussion, and I'm going to start with Rebecca, because she is a dairy farmer, and all too often, whereas we talk a lot about crops and arable farming, we don't talk nearly as much about what goes into milk and dairy products. So first, Rebecca, tell us a little bit about the origin of the business and why you decided that you had to take this dramatic step of converting your pig farm to a dairy farm, besides falling in love with the cattle.
Is there anything else? I mean, they're the most magnificent creatures. So as you already mentioned, I used to be a land agent. Now, I always preface any talk I do by apologizing for that. Are there any land agents in the room? Fantastic. What I usually do is tell them to do better. So I worked as a land agent for about 10 years. Long story short, I was made redundant. I had had a period of illness, and I was managed out of the business. That coincided with our intensive pig enterprise doing what happens on intensive pig enterprises. Pigs got sick. We had to get rid of the whole herd, and we actually had time to go on holiday. Now, that was 8 years ago. I will preface again by saying that was the last time we went on holiday as a family, because we fell in love with cows, and then we've started this wonderful business. So we were at the stage, I mean, people talk about paradigm shifts. I'm sure that they'll be mentioned during the evening, but wow, we really did have a huge paradigm shift. Our entire world was rocked upside down, and we were lucky enough, as I say, to fall in love with cows. Everyone laughs at that, but it's completely true. And we started our business. So not only did we, you said intensive pigs, and then you talk about dairy, and I can see people going around the room going, isn't that still really intensive? Well, not the way we do it. It's completely different, very extensive, and we've changed the face of the entire farm.
By the way, I think also, why don't you explain the financial precariousness of also running an intensive pig farm in the traditional mode? Because I think that's an important part of the story about why, by diversifying or by changing your practice, you're in a better financial and economic position.
Yeah. So, I mean, if, for example, we used to grow, or finish, is the technical term, 11,000 pigs a year. That's quite a lot for a small family farm. It's not a lot for some of these big commercial units. It's peanuts. Had we wanted, or were we crazy enough to want to go back into that, it would have been $1.5 million in the hole by the time we got to the end of our first year, from first sows on the ground to being able to sell something. So we were lucky in a way, which probably sounds ridiculous, to be facing that sort of huge black hole. Because we had to think differently. We couldn't afford to do that, so we had to think outside the box and do something differently. So now our business is very diverse. We have the dairy, we still have pigs, but in a very different way, sheep, beef. a farm shop, a vineyard, which we should probably talk about, and farm shop and butchery, and we feed people. We used to farm by numbers. We don't anymore. We feed people, and that's really, really rewarding.
Okay, so now for the audience, I don't think most people know, the general public is not aware of what traditional dairy farming entails. Mm-hmm. So tell us about that from end to end, from a calf all the way to the grocery store shelf, and then how that compares with your current practice.
Yep. So we are a cow with calf dairy. Simply put, what we do is we keep the cows and calves together for 9 to 12 months. We milk once a day. And I will say that I learnt to milk from YouTube. So YouTube University.
You can do it too.
It's highly underrated. On a conventional dairy farm, and I've never worked on a conventional dairy farm. I have got friends who are conventional, and they love their animals in their own way, but I couldn't do it. On a normal dairy, calf will be taken away from its mother within a very short period of time, and in some instances, a calf will be born in a wheelbarrow and wheeled off. It doesn't ever create a bond with its mother. Don't get me wrong, weaning is a long, convoluted process, but in any other livestock production system, the most important thing is keeping the young with its mother. It is, because you get a much better animal at the end of it. So that's what happens it's called a snatch dairy system. And it is literally that, snatch the calves away. So, and a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money goes into rearing calves. Farmers either buy a big pasteurizer and they pasteurize the milk to feed the calves, or they buy cow formula in. And then they milk the cow.
How many times? How many times a day?
Up to, in a robot system, up to 3 or 4 times a day. Normal parlours, it's twice a day. And that milk goes from the parlour to the bulk tank. It's collected by the processor, and it's whisked away. It's boiled, it's separated, it's pulled apart, put back together. It's 1%, 2%, 4%. It's a white water, very androgynous. And most farmers don't drink their own milk, in the same way that most farmers have never eaten their own bread. And it's very sad. And, literally, as I said, farming by numbers, and the margins are tiny, the returns are pitiful, and people do it for love of their animals, and they really do believe that they are producing a product which is good for you, the consumer. And don't get me wrong, milk in any form is a really good whole food, and for goodness sake, always buy full fat. But it can be so much better, and I think with all food, what we're used to is as a shadow of actually what we used to eat 60, 80 years ago, and that's where we need to go, in my humble opinion. I have lots of opinions. So.
Okay, so besides the more humane treatment of the cows, what are some other benefits that you derive from this different model of raising, supplying milk, of raising cattle?
As I said, they're beautiful creatures to work with. We have a really close bond. Follow us on Instagram. You'll see our live videos. The cows come to me to be milked in the morning. They come when they're called by name. They're not just a number. They're a person, and they're treated as such. They're all individuals. The milk is so much more nutritious. We talk about ultra-processed food all the time. It starts with milk. It's a really simple product. But actually, by the time it's been abused by the processors, you're not getting what you should do. So raw milk, a lot of people will be lactose intolerant. Well, actually, raw milk, the lactase enzyme is still alive. It's not been killed, so you can digest the milk. We have A2 cows. That's a different beta-casein protein. I'm going to go all geeky scientist. Is that okay?
No, it's excellent. I think this is something that every consumer in the room will take away with them tonight.
I have learned so much since getting my first cow. I had no idea how little I knew when I got one, and not just the whole learning to milk thing. So A2 is a completely different beta-casein protein. So some people who can't drink milk from a cow can drink milk from a goat and a sheep, and that is the protein structure. Hopefully this isn't going to weird you out, but actually human breast milk has the same beta-casein protein as an A2 cow. And what we've done over the years is the cows that produce the most milk tend to be A1, which is less tolerable by most people. So And you take that a step further, I also work for Pasture for Life, an amazing organisation. Go and look them up as well. Our cows are 100% pasture-fed. They have a natural diet. Actually, our first 12 cows I got from a friend in Scotland, they hadn't eaten grass before, so I had to teach them. That was fun.
Wow.
No, seriously, it was very traumatic. They'd never had electric fencing before. I'm not sure who'll get more upset, me or them. And we went around the fence, and then they stood there and they shouted. They wanted to go back in the shed. And girls, you can eat this stuff. And one of them worked out that the green stuff was edible. And then they all piled in the same place. Girls, it's everywhere. And it's really fascinating to see these animals develop. So we are what they eat. And that'll be your pork. So we still have pigs, they're soya-free. Our eggs from our chickens are soya-free. Our cows are 100% pasture-fed. Our sheep are 100% pasture-fed. Ultra-processed food starts with the animal. So,
Did you want to talk about the breakdown of the fat molecule?
Yeah, so homogenization, and I've been trying really hard to find a study on this for you, but who else likes a conspiracy theory?
Oh, God, okay.
No, so it's really hard. So I know, and we can prove that raw milk is better for you, but it's very hard to find people who will do a randomized study. So it's almost impossible to do. So in the same way, homogenization basically, who buys milk here that has a cream line on the top? Wow, anyone not know what a cream line on milk is? No, don't put your hands up, it's too sad. So basically, milk, when it comes from a cow, will settle out. So you'll have the fat on top because the molecules are really big. They're like a basketball compared to a golf ball. Any golfers in the room? Yeah? No one? Oh, one. There we go. So what happens when our milk is homogenized is that it's highly processed again. The fat particles are broken down, and then they're all, your lovely big fat basketball-sized molecules are all golf ball size. There's a huge downside with that, is that our bodies can't identify the fat. So the fat then comes into our bloodstream, and that is giving us issues with obesity and bad cholesterol. If you look at what happens on the continent, they don't have homogenized milk in the same way, and they have less issues with obesity, etc. So we're actually doing pasteurization. Is done because I wouldn't trust pick a supermarket. I wouldn't trust them to look after my milk. We sell everything direct. It's raw. So there is a reason for pasteurization. I think initially, obviously, done for wine. I think we were poisoning ourselves with bad wine. That's just a tragedy in its own right, isn't it? And then this was rolled out to milk. And you can imagine trying to bring fresh milk from Norfolk into London on a train. If it's not pasteurized, it's going to be a bit tricky. Although we do courier it all over the place. But pasteurization means that you're not getting as much goodness out of the milk. Homogenization is dangerous. But again, trying to find a study to prove that is very hard because, of course, the processors don't like it.
Okay, and this is my last question for now to you. You have hinted at the fact that there's no conventionally available outlet to distribute your milk. Because it's raw, you're not going into this big industrial food, agri-food chain. So what are the options for somebody like you who wants to supply raw milk?
Everything is, as I say, is done direct. So if you want to go into raw milk production, then you need to sell from the farm gate. That's extended to online sales. And so that's what we've done. We sell all over the place.
So
there is no choice other than lobbying the government, changing the law.
Okay. So you don't have a Wildfarmed or a Hodmedods, which is actually creating a route to market for dairy products so far?
No.
That could be you, Rebecca.
Well, it could be.
But that allows me to now move on to Edd. You guys sat in the wrong order.
Oh, yeah, we thought he was next.
Okay.
We switched.
That's okay. Okay, so now Edd, we're now going to talk. We're going to move to arable farming and specifically to wheat because that is the mainstay of the wild farmed business. So Edd, introduce the wild farm business. Tell us what it is and how it's basically bringing regenerative agriculture literally to the grocery store and to our dinner table.
Yeah, so Wildfarmed is a farming and food business. We exist to scale nature-friendly farming across the UK. We work with a wonderful group of farmers who grow wheat for us in a specific way that's third-party audited, such that we can give customer guarantees around reduced carbon intensity, increased biodiversity, water purity in the rivers around, because probably most people don't know that the greatest polluter of water is agricultural runoff as opposed to sewage, and higher nutritional density of the crop. We have done it under a brand very deliberately, quite a loud, garish, shouty brand, some might say, and we've done that deliberately to engage an audience through consumer behaviour. That's how we think that land use will change. As a company, we exist to convert land into being grown in a nature-friendly way, but just simply asking farmers to do that isn't going to work. The whole supply chain has to participate, and that's what we're doing, is connecting farmers, food businesses, and consumers, and creating all under a brand of the big green garish W. So wherever you see that, you understand that you're supporting this movement.
Now, I want to actually go back to some of the basic definitions also of regenerative farming, because I think that many people in this room, they've heard this catchphrase bandied around, but that doesn't have any specific particulars or substance. And Wildfarm has actually gone ahead and stated its principles, the principles of regenerative agriculture. So can you share those with us?
Yeah, I can see a few different faces around this room who may be able to answer this question, but there's the problem with the word regenerative agriculture, the words regenerative agriculture, is not just that it's got way too many syllables to ever catch on. It's that it can mean anything to anybody currently. And that was a challenge that we found when we first wanted to create mass change of land use. Was we initially started as an organically certified business, but we found that the amount of land that was organically certified and the incentives for farmers to convert to that weren't such that met the objectives that we went of trying to scale land use change quickly. So what we equally understood was there are a number of initiatives that are reducing inputs a little bit, which is to be commended in many ways, but it's not truly regenerative. And we will no doubt on this panel with the man to my left get into exactly what that may or may not mean. But for us, regenerating means improving the soil year on year while also taking a sensible yield from the land.
Okay. Now, who wants to also answer? I think Josiah would be good to pose this question too. Tell us what are, because I think for the public, they want to know how regenerative farming and agriculture are different from organic farming, because that's the basic question or the choice being made at the grocery store. So can you just tell us some of the basic criteria for organic certification of arable crops?
Well, I mean, in principle, they don't need to be different at all.
Yeah, exactly.
And there are plenty of regenerative organic farmers who would apply the principles of regenerative farming, about keeping your soil covered, about introducing livestock, about growing a diversity of crops, and do that alongside the principles that are outlined by organic production. Organic production obviously protected by law, it's protected by European law and has been for sort of 40 odd years. And that is certainly in an arable context, it's quite different from livestock point of view, means the complete elimination of synthetic oil-based inputs, so that's both pesticides, herbicides, but also synthetic nitrogen. And synthetic nitrogen is a really important climate forcing. It's produced through a process called the Haber-Bosch process, which was invented in the first quarter of the 20th century. And it's allowed this huge explosion in productivity, but it comes at huge cost. It's responsible for between 2.5% and 4% of global man-made climate emissions, depending on which reports you read, and that's always the challenge. And so organic farming says we need to get away from that, and we need to manage that nitrogen requirement of the crops that we're harvesting through a rotation. And that rotation means a rest period where you would use crops like leguminous plants that can fix nitrogen from the atmosphere through a relationship with soil microbial life. Doing that does have a land use requirement because you need a long enough rest period that you have enough nitrogen in the soil in order that you can then produce your harvestable crop. So from a land use perspective, organic farming can be quite challenging as compared to that, but it doesn't externalise the impact of those inputs. So it's a balancing act.
And I want to challenge the very first thing you said when you introduced him there, which is that's the choice. That is not the choice. We are absolutely on the same path. The choice is the other 98% of food that most of people have. They don't even have the choice at the moment. That's the only thing that is made available, and whether it is, whether it's organically certified, and we're absolutely on the same path of that, or a strong regenerative offering, or actually I implore all of you to buy Rebecca's milk because I buy it regularly. And it's engaging with supply chains where there's some transparency and understanding what's going on.
Right, and that's why you have this you're building this potent consumer brand. To break it down to the audience, though, I think it's very important. In a Venn diagram, the big circle would be called regenerative farming. Within that circle, there's a smaller circle called organic farming, which is delineated by statutory requirements, which prohibit the use of pesticides, herbicides, and what was the last thing, the nitrogen?
Synthetic nitrogen.
Yes, but of course, the big circle and the little circle share those same principles of putting back more into the soil than you take out. That's the general precept.
I would say that as an organic advocate, that's not actually always the case. So that circle...
It's supposed to be the case,
that small circle is not always contained within the big circle.
Yeah.
Okay, where is the non-overlap then?
The non-overlap might be, for example, as a good example might be organic horticultural production in Spain, which is done in huge monocultures, and it's abiding by the principles of organic agriculture, but it's not necessarily...
Okay.
Or organic grain production in Eastern Europe. And again, one of the problems in the world that we live in, which is wheat and grain, the organic, I think it's between 90 and 95% of organic flour in this country is from grain that's imported, and we don't know from where.
This is a challenge. At the moment, there's a lot of grain.
So you could say fairly, however, that was completely chemical-free, but...
It's absolutely chemical-free, but it could not be grown in soil that has all of that microbial life that Josiah was describing.
Why don't we know where it's from? Because it could be from multiple sources.
That's right. Because of the way the infrastructure of the entire industry, and we don't need to, let's not get into organic bashing here. That doesn't help anybody or move anything along. What we're trying to do is create a path for conventional agriculture that exists for very, very good reason. If any of you haven't read Henry Dimbleby's book, Ravenous, I strongly recommend that you read it. There's very good reasons why conventional agriculture or chemical-based agriculture exists today. It avoided mass starvation post-Second World War and should be celebrated alongside electricity and the internet as a feat of human achievement. However, as with all things, when we focus just on one thing, which was yield, there are unintended consequences, which are these externalities to which Josiah was referring, and we're paying the price of that today. So whatever the system, whether it's wild-farmed or another regenerative one, or organic or a small home farm, the collection of these things should all be seen together and not competing with each other.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. I want to make that clear. Like, everybody is steering, moving in the right direction. Rebecca, you wanted to interject, please.
Yeah, just slightly. I mean, I'm asked all the time, are we organic? And the answer is no. I'm too lazy to do the certification. And also, from my perspective, as someone who keeps cows and calves together, that, for me, would be lowest common denominator. What's a hard word to say?
Lowest common denominator.
Thank you, LCD, lowest common denominator. We do more in a dairy perspective than an organic farmer, but I wouldn't be allowed to do some of the holistic planned grazing, which is so beneficial to the soil, in an organic system, because the stocking density isn't right for the box-ticking exercise. Organic is a fantastic lobby. They've worked really hard, and I think the principles are amazing. But from someone who wanted to transition, say if we had wanted to go and change our arable enterprise, it would have been really hard just to go cold turkey straight away or go organic. That's where I think there's so much power in the regen movement, because you don't have to change everything at once, and it's direction of travel. I think organic is where we want to get to, but again, it's the nuance. Some of the worst organic practices are not as good as some conventional practices. So that is where the devil's in the detail, and it's really hard, but I'm not knocking organic at all. I think my phrase would be know your farmer, find out where your food comes from. And that's really hard in this lovely metropolis.
Now, Ed, you have said that it is a philosophy of Wild Farm to meet the consumer and the farmer where they are. So tell us how you've executed that vision. What does that actually mean on the grocery store shelf or the dinner table?
The whole supply chain, it's just like Rebecca said, it's not getting stuck with dogma. One of the benefits of all the tech advances we've seen in the last 25 years is that it can and should be possible to be able to know your farmer without having to go to the farm. For us, having a group that grow for us exclusively, it's the only place that we source our grain from, seeing all the way through to the mill, that the same group of farmers who grew that grain and then that becomes a flour and then onto the shelves at Waitrose currently, has been a hell of an effort from a lot of people. We're asking farmers who've been doing the same thing for a long time, typically under very difficult circumstances, to change part of what they're doing. We're asking processors or mills to take what's really an irrelevantly small amount of grain to them and put it through a completely delineated system. And then we're asking bakers to change the way that they've been baking, to have a longer fermentation process, which again is a real pain for them in their semi-industrial bakeries. And then we're getting supermarkets to take a risk on a brand that no one knows. It's having to charge a bit of a premium because we're so inefficient across the system. That's what not getting stuck by dogma allows to happen.
Now, all of these steps add up, and they add up to a higher cost, even of something as inexpensive as flour. So how have you been able to, again, meet the consumer where they are? Because presumably you mean in terms of price and the product, and I assume that's why you're selling sliced white bread. I mean, how have you been able to square the circle? Because this is the ultimate challenge of regenerative agriculture being brought to the consumer at a reasonable, affordable price.
It has to be so. When I started helping a friend of mine who was a farmer in France, and he'd previously had a different career as well. And when he grew a grain, he bought a very degraded farm. He had a number of failures. He hadn't been a farmer before. He was forced down a road of having to improve his soil while growing a crop. After many, many failures, and against all the odds, he managed to pull it off. And then when we went to sell it to the local grain market, the numbers simply didn't add up, which is when I came in to help him. My background is with numbers, to say you're going to have to travel up the value chain. So to answer your question, what we realized was asking every farmer to do it the way Andy was doing it, in a really esoteric way in France, and believe me, it was quite... we would never have got any scale whatsoever doing it the way he was doing it in France. He was doing it by a horse-drawn cart with GPS, which we think may have been a world first. We have to meet with farmers and say, what can you do that we're happy? We have to coalesce around a place where we can get some sort of scalability. And equally, why did we launch with a sliced white bread? Because that's the one that people eat the most. And we didn't want to. In our first iteration, we were selling flour exclusively to independent bakeries and high-end restaurants, which was great, and we're really pleased to get that level of engagement. But we're in this to scale things, and to do that, it meant our internal mantra was always, we're on the long road to Greggs, because until we're in Greggs, we're not making any different whatsoever. And I'm very pleased to say that Greggs is a customer of ours these days.
That is incredible.
So it is possible.
Are they buying bread or are they buying flour?
They're buying flour, but it's possible on a small part. And the point is they're doing something. Have they changed their entire supply? No, of course not. Right, but they're doing something, and it's this commitment. We were talking about this before. Yeah. Just doing something, getting started. Whether you're a farmer, whether you're a baker, whether you're a big business or a small business, I think everybody has agency, and that's the message that we try to put out with Wildfarmed.
Okay. No, that's being communicated very effectively. Now, Josiah, we could transpose a lot of what Edd has described for their business model to Hodmedods and what you've done, but why don't you describe how your model is actually slightly different?
Yeah, I mean, in lots of respects, it's very similar. And in fact, some of the farmers that we work with are very, very similar. So there is overlap there. We're working with a different set of crops, largely. So we tend to work with those crops that aren't wheat. We do work with wheat, but we work with pulses and seeds, so beans and peas. And the aim really is to create a higher value rotation. We talked about rotations a bit before in context of organic
And also,
agriculture.
I forgot to, we didn't give more context at the beginning, but also that because you wanted to grow crops or sell crops that were that the human being would eat directly. Because we're forgetting to talk about that. That 75% of the land use is in this country is dedicated to. Of agricultural land is dedicated to growing crops that are fed to animals or to livestock. So this was also, that was another decision, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so I mean, the actual origin of our business was a community project in Norwich. We'd been working for a non-governmental organisation looking at food systems and dietary change, and we were asked by a community group whether the city of Norwich, which is about 160,000 people, could feed itself. And if it did that, how would we change diets and land use? And one of the things that became immediately clear is that we'd be eating a lot less meat and a lot less dairy, but those livestock that we were eating and using products of would be in these more regenerative systems where they're helping to fix nitrogen into the soil and cycle nutrients through the system much more quickly. And the thing that became really immediately clear was that we're going to have to eat more pulses, beans and peas, lentils and chickpeas. And that, when we were working with the community group in Norwich and working with people in Norwich, felt like a really tall order because pulses, this is a 2008-9, pulses have a terrible reputation as a kind of hair shirt sort of hippie food from the 70s that no one really eats willingly, but they'll eat them if they're you know, you'll have some lentils if there's some sausages in the stew kind of thing. And this is a really difficult thing to sell, you know, the idea that our right to meat might be questioned. And even 10 or 15 years ago, that was a tricky thing. It's become even more polarized now, which is ridiculous in lots of respects. But the great thing about eating those pulses is that they answer some of those land use questions about organic agriculture. 70% of the UK is grazing land. A lot of it is only fit for grazing land, but some of it could be doing other things. 50% of the arable land, we've got about 5 million hectares of arable land in any given year. Of that, 50%, broadly speaking, is producing animal feed. And at the same time, we're importing about 3 million tonnes of soya a year, and all soya comes with deforestation risk, to feed animals in sheds, to supplement the grain, to give them the right amino acid balance. And that is a disaster globally. It's a disaster for our diet, and it's a disaster for our landscape. And you know, I'm 50 this year, and in the 50 years that I've been alive, roughly speaking, biodiversity in the UK has dropped by 50%. And at the moment, 1 in 6 species in the UK, it's about 15,000 species, is threatened with extinction. And part of that is all sorts of other factors, like climate change and things. But agriculture has an important role to play in that, particularly a post-war paradigm, which we will never be short of food again. And the main priority, as Ed has said, is just yield. We've got to produce a surplus. We need to just keep producing food. We need to make sure it's cheap so that everyone can access that food. And that, as you say, is a miracle in lots of ways, but it's come at huge costs. Cost to the landscape, cost to our health, and perhaps cost to our connection with the world around us. We are not separate from the ecosystem that we depend on. We are part of it, and we need to replace ourselves into that system if we're going to address some of the problems that we see. If we other nature, then we will never be able to really properly address the problems that we face.
Did you want to add something?
No, I'm nodding along.
Yeah, no, the choir is nodding, basically. No, but did you want to also compare what you're doing with, because I think the thing that when I met you, I was struck by the labor intensivity of the Hodmedods advice on agronomy. And
so I think,
tell the audience about that.
Yeah, so the challenge...
And what you underwent, because it was so outside of the conventional supply chain process.
Yeah, so the massive advantage, I mean, I wish we'd started with wheat. The massive advantage of wheat as a very much a known commodity with a very clear human consumption market, with a set of specifications that allow you to sell into milling and baking and other end uses, is that there's a lot of it out there, and you can begin to engage with farmers about how you might change that system. The challenge we had with British-grown pulses, and beans and peas in particular, is that no one was eating them. They were pretty much...
And they're really hard to grow.
We're eating them tonight, though.
They're pretty much all going for animal feed. They're undervalued on farm, so farmers are disincentivized from growing them. There's been very little money spent on agronomic research or on crop development. So as I had said, the varieties that do exist are actually really difficult to grow. And so to get those back into human consumption, we needed to create a whole set of narratives about the fact that these are delicious and we should be eating them. We had to go to farmers and say, yeah, honestly, we will buy them, and I know there's a risk, and we're going to have to come up with a model that helps to manage that risk. And that meant a much smaller, slower start. So that would be developing the routes to market, identifying ways to manage risk on farm. One of those is through bicropping. So that's growing at least 2 species together. Sometimes we're attempting polycultures where you grow multiple species together, but usually only 2 are harvested. So one of them might be a clover underlay that is growing under the crop. And then working out how much it costs the farmer to grow that crop and what we need to pay them to incentivize them. So the farmer that we first started working with on peas in the UK was organic, and he said that in the 90s he'd grown peas for human consumption, but he'd stopped because he couldn't compete with Canadian imports. And the Canadian imports were only about 10 or 20 pounds a tonne less than it cost him to produce, but it only takes 10 or 20 pounds a tonne to make it not worth growing that crop at all. And so we didn't have to offer him very much more in order to incentivize him to grow that crop. And by having that conversation, we could then talk to him about the varieties we were interested in growing, which weren't the mainstream varieties. There were varieties, there's a Carlin pea, which we're going to eat tonight, which is a very traditional crop in the northeast and the northwest, but isn't very much eaten in the south of England, or wasn't when we started. So we've had to do some complicated things. The other thing that we realised early on is that the pulses that we grow really well here, we stopped eating 400 years ago, largely, because they got stigmatised as poor people's food. And farmers do export them for human consumption to Japan, to Asia, for peas in particular, and to North Africa and West Asia for the beans, where they're a really important part of the diet. But we had stopped eating them in the UK. And so kind of recovering a cuisine and a set of recipes was something that we started with. But we also realised that we needed to try and grow the crops that people in the UK actually wanted to eat in the same way of going to where people are. So that is where a lot of the agronomic work has gone on. So that's been doing things like working out how to grow lentils in the UK. So in the historic record, and it's really interesting when you look at, there's a fantastic poem by a yeoman farmer called Thomas Tusser, and he was writing in Tudor England. He wrote this poem for farmers about when to plant your crops. You know, this was the handbook of its day. And he talks about when to plant your lentils, when to plant your peas, when to plant your rye, how to bicrop things. It's an amazing poem. I recommend it in these little couplets. And those sorts of little bits of evidence made us think, well, hang on a minute, people were growing those crops. They weren't necessarily very widely traded. They were subsistence crops, but it was definitely possible to do it. And we just needed to recover that in order to introduce a bit more diversity into our UK system. Because not just the post-war model, which has caused us this reduction in diversity and this increase in monocultural production, but really mid-19th century, when we really started to move grain in from the empire, from Canada, but also from Russia and non-imperial places. And we really began at that point. We went into a deep agricultural recession that lasted all the way through into the first half of the 20th century and really ended just after the Second World War with a sort of productivist paradigm that saw us growing more food. But in that time, we de-skilled our farming community. We lost a lot of crop diversity on our farms. I mean, we grow quinoa. We found Victorian farmers were growing quinoa, and it was written up in the Times as this miracle crop. And we thought we'd done something new. And I think reintroducing that diversity into rotation, because those crops all have different soil-root interactions. They're all doing different things with each other, but also with the soil microbiotic life. And getting that back into the soil, getting that back into farm rotations has a big impact on the ecology of the farm, but it also has a massive positive impact on our health. We need that diversity in our guts. You know, we rely on these 6 plant species globally and very, very few varieties within those. We could be eating thousands, tens of thousands, and we just don't.
Wow. Okay. That was incredible. By the way, were you schooled as an agronomist originally?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, this is amazing because he's so passionate about it.
Well, no, but so I did a degree in ecology, and I think that is the thing that has got me interested in the systems that support everything. And I thought I would be an ecologist and that I'd save the world by saving the rainforest or something right and naive like that. And then I realized this idea that we are central to this ecosystem. And actually the way that we engage with the ecosystem every day is what we're about to do here, and it's eating a meal. And I think the convivial nature of this meal is so important as well. We eat together, we share stories, we rethink the world at those moments. and that by engaging with the way food is produced and distributed and shared, we could affect a cultural shift that would change our relationship with the world around us. And I know that sounds
No, it's not.
over grandiose, but it's what we need to
I mean, you're in the Tate Modern, mate. You know, I mean, like if you can,
I mean, I always say food is our main relationship to the environment. It's a very intimate relationship, and when you consider the vast majority of land use in the UK is dedicated to agriculture. I mean, the fact that we could learn from food so much and that it can be the fulcrum of change, we don't put enough emphasis on it at all. Now, moving to the meal that we're about to have, I want to, Hamish, please tell us also about, how I know for a fact that Tate Eats, the subdivision of Tate Enterprises that handles the food and hospitality business, is at the forefront of the cultural institutions sector. Now, what are some of the steps that you have taken to make the museums, cafes and restaurants among the most sustainable in the industry?
Well, I'd say the first thing, I'd just like to pick up on 2 points there. First of all, I had a bowl of quinoa in our staff canteen at lunch today, smoked quinoa, which is on our staff canteen menu. And canteen's a terrible word, actually, our staff dining menu. And I constantly have to remind people as I walk past, everyone queues up there and we serve, it varies each day, but probably 100, 150 people each day. And I say it's British quinoa, and no one believes me. And maybe just one other point that you made around, because I think it's an important thing when you do decide to go on this journey and change what you're doing within your restaurants and business, is just this very notion that you actually just need to change. And once you get over that, you can then start to look at things. And just to start with a very granular example, I liked your example of changing the way that you ferment your sourdoughs, because we started using your wild farm flour outside in our pizza container there, and I think it's hopefully indicative how we try to source food. It's very easy to buy in, ready-made pizza dough balls. If you go to lots of places, that's how they do it. We've always made fermented our own sourdoughs and then turned that into pizza. Anyway, we're using one type of flour, and then we tried to use the same recipe for your flour, and it didn't work at all. And it was like these thin, kind of crispy things. And someone from your team came in and showed us how to do it. And so now we're able to make thousands of pizza out there in the summer in the right way. So I think kind of culturally, you have to kind of create an environment where you're willing to change. I mean, we do, we've gradually gone through and looked at our supplier base. And, many people are doing that. That's not rocket science. It's, we're just going through a huge process at the moment of looking at how we might implement a new supplier accreditation process and set a kind of baseline of what we want from people before we'll deal with them. But I mean, that's actually quite an easy thing to do and is not really the whole answer. I think it's then also about having the relationship with those suppliers and really understanding them, because a lot of the discussion here has been about accreditation and what people are doing and the nuance and all that kind of stuff. If you're dealing with 100, 200 suppliers, which we are, not all food and drink suppliers, but other suppliers for other areas of our business, it's kind of, you need that kind of base level to feel the confidence that you're working with the right people. And then it's actually about building that relationship and visiting people. We're going to eat some venison this evening. Some of our team have been down and visited, actually the previous estate, but the butcher that supplies us, that ethical butcher. We go on trips, we see the people, and we build up that kind of relationship with them.
Oh. And then tell us about the coffee roasting business, because I think it's one of the big achievements of Tate Enterprises to start its own coffee business. It's at the forefront of the industry.
Yeah, no, sure. And I think that's something that's really kind of informed quite a lot of our rest of our journey as well, because we and again, I'd love to say that we set out to start up a coffee roasting business and we were going to be super sustainable. That's not actually why we started it. We started it because we sell about 20 tons of coffee through our 2 London sites a year. So in Tate Modern and Tate Britain, we sell 650,000 cups of coffee a year. So we initially worked out that actually we could buy the green beans cheaper, roast them ourselves, and employ someone to do that and make some more money out of it. And then I had a really rather brilliant person who took over that business and completely changed the sourcing model of that in about 2015. And we went to a gender equality project. So we looked to source at least 50% of all our coffee direct from farms. Many of those farms we've been working with for 10 years or more now. And actually 3 or 4 years ago, our previous head of coffee then worked out he'd been on site visiting a couple of places in Brazil and worked out that 70% of the people who worked in those farms were all female. So we then decided to take it to 70%. So now 70% of all the coffee that we buy is either female-owned or female-led producers. And so just that actually is in a sort of nutshell, actually, I think gave us as a business quite a lot of confidence to really look at some of the other things we're doing, because it's quite impactful because it's a lot, and B, actually it was not easy, but coffee, most of the coffee we sell it's coffee and it's milk, so there's two things you need to look at and really examine. So again, taking those lessons that we learned from that and then trying to kind of replicate that through the rest of our supply chain. And I mean, again, it's giving the people on the ground the confidence to then take the decisions that you want to do, because of course one of the other big elements of coffee that everyone walks around, buys a cup of takeaway coffee is takeaway cups. So we've just finally now managed to come up with a solution to remove takeaway cups entirely from our business. We changed it over about 6 weeks ago. We have a space here in Tate Modern, which is our busiest coffee site, which is 250,000 takeaway cups we were going through there in one site a year, including the tea. So it's like getting the people on the ground to get really granular, like how do you get enough cups to do that on a day basis? How do you get them there? Because we can't wash anything up on that floor, and working through problems like that.
Yeah, no, I asked Hamish if he had 10,000 porcelain cups, but he wasn't sure.
No.
And then I want to also make sure we address there's actually there's an elephant in the room, food waste.
Yep.
And before you answer the question, I also wanted to flag that there is a ceramic artist over there, Martha Wiles, who is obsessed with food waste and has created an entire collection around it for both for herself, but also for Groundswell, and has worked with Wildfarmed. But I just wanted to flag to you, the consumer, that the UN estimates that 10% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions are associated with the food we have not consumed. If food waste were a country, it would be the third biggest emitter after the US and China. What's more, 70% of UK food waste takes place in the home. And there's a higher level of food waste. It's correlated with the higher the income, which isn't very surprising. And it is definitely one of the biggest challenges that the hospitality and restaurant industry has to tackle. So, I mean, tell us what can be done. It seems it's a very difficult problem, but I think it's important to air it.
It's a hugely, fantastically difficult problem, and it requires a complete change amongst how we operate as operators, and actually requires change from everyone in this room as well about when they walk into spaces and what they expect to see and how they eat their food. I mean, we measure our food waste because we work with a supplier who takes it away, weighs us, tells us how much we're using. And again, we've just embarked on a project to separate out, because a huge amount of our food waste is actually coffee waste, which we kind of work on the basis that we're going to serve coffee. Unless we separate that out, we can't actually reduce that. We can do something good with it, but it is going to be there. So very much focusing on actually what is our real food waste in our kitchens, what's coming off the plates and what's being thrown away. But I mean, I'd love to say that there's a kind of magic wand, but there isn't, because it's getting back to that granular level. I mean, for instance, the cafe where we met in downstairs, the corner bar downstairs, that used to be a pre-packaged space. So you imagine your kind of pret a manger, you'd go in there, you could pick up a sandwich, a box salad. That's actually quite an easy, that's almost an easier environment to control food waste in, because you can have a shelf, you can have 4 things on it, it looks good, people will come up, they'll collect one, and then you can kind of things down. To make an area look really great, what we're now doing, because we wanted to get rid of the single use, is actually have beautiful bowls of food sitting there, and you want to have that all day, and if someone walks in at 3 o'clock and there's nothing to eat, they're basically pretty unhappy. It's how do you manage that? Because the reality of that is you end up throwing away more food. So it's about trying to find kind of individual solutions for all the individual spaces. And again, we talked when we were discussing earlier about kind of the sort of the warts and all approach. One of the dishes we're going to have this evening comes from a producer called Forge Farm. Great guy who makes the most amazing kind of pumpkins, squashes, all that kind of thing. We try to integrate all his into our box salads and the salads that we serve downstairs. And just to give you the scale of that, we produce about 2 tons of salad a month to sell in our spaces. So there is a lot of work that goes into cutting all that stuff up and prepping it all. He's providing us with the most amazing squashes. Previously, we used to buy squash peeled. You obviously lose a lot of when it's peeled, pre-prepped. You lose a lot of you're basically creating waste just by doing that. So we went to doing that, and it didn't work, because people didn't like buying squashes with skins on them. And some of his squashes had hard skins, and they were hard to chop up. And just the labour that we were doing, prepping and involving that, just completely went off the scale, and it became uneconomic. So it's about trying things and then actually acknowledging that doesn't work, and then you kind of regroup and try something else.
Well, I think it sounds like what you're doing is pretty amazing. Putting principles over price and all this headache factor, it's a lot of experimentation. For example, tonight when the team heard that I had invited Old Hall Farm to the panel, they actually sought her out and incorporated some of her products into this evening's dinner. And you do that all the time. It's not a cookie cutter operation. You're constantly experimenting and iterating. I think it's also worth mentioning that Tate Eats is the only museum which actually has full control over its catering and restaurant business, as opposed to every other museum in London, at least, which outsources the catering operation to a third party and therefore loses a lot of ability to make it more sustainable. And so now, final question for everybody. Then this is kind of an unfair question, but try to answer it. If there was, what is the one thing in your mind which could that could enable step change in making the food industry or the agri-food industry more sustainable?
That's easy.
You know, it's such an, oh good, I'm glad it's easy. You have to go first, Ed.
It's education and information. I grew up in concrete cities my entire life. I had absolutely no business whatsoever being involved in this. I was having a very nice, peaceful life, and the moment I found out about this and got dragged into a spectacularly large rabbit-shaped hole by my spectacularly large 6'9" business partner, it became something that I've dragged a number of other people down, not just our amazing team at Wildfarmed, but literally anybody who I've ever met, and now everybody who I ever meet. It becomes all-encompassing, and you know, it's worth mentioning that these guys were the originals. Like, they're 10 years ahead of anybody, so it must have been even more lonely when you guys started. But I think if when Josiah started, everybody had known a small fraction of what I know now, and I'm no expert. I don't think we'd have to be sitting here talking about it on panels.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I do think it's education, but I think when we say education, we often think of something quite didactic, something that we're going to teach people, we're going to tell them how to eat. I think the best way to educate people is by what's just on their plates, and I think we could do a huge amount more. There's a massive opportunity to shift habits, change culture through public procurement, and if we could, and if we could get school food. I know this is a drum that we've been beating for 25 years through our NGO work and things. I know it's something that people talk about a lot, but it's a really transformative process. And where it has happened, I mean, it's a good example of Copenhagen, who began this process in 2005-06 with the Food House and began training chefs to use local ingredients. And that was really to address a very particular problem, which was there's a nitrate pollution problem in the water. How do you get rid of that? Well, you stop it getting there in the first place. How do you stop it getting in there? You change farm practice. If you change farm practice, you're changing what's produced. You have to buy that thing in order to incentivize the farmers to do that. By doing that process, they've changed eating habits in Copenhagen. And that is quite amazing. And that's over a not very long period of time. And I think if we had we've got a new government, haven't we?
No, it's great.
If they had
We
some
should
bravery
write it.
about this,
You should start a petition, the two of you guys. Okay, no, I'm serious. Because it's one of the extremely specific, concrete actions that can be taken, which you, citizen, can actually lobby for and really target as a goal.
The impact it would have on NHS budgets would be significant.
It would be huge.
The whole thing is
There's a massive cost benefit.
A direct correlation. Rebecca, what about you?
So I'm on a theme, but I think the one word that kept hitting me as you were both talking was truth. And that is the truth about food. And we talk about education, but actually what we need is clear labelling. People can't make the right choices if they don't know the origin of their food and how it's grown and what the effect of that food is on your body. People don't know the truth of what food can do for you. You can make yourself healthy by eating differently. And I think food is, I sell milk. You know, come on, that is one of the least popular agricultural products that's produced. Farmers, they poo-poo, it's only milk. You know, it's only milk. It's only a bit of flour. It's only a few peas. But it's so important. It's the foundation of our diet. With our farm shop, when we had lockdown, we're a little farm shop, not you know, we're near to a village, we're not near to any town, so, you know, for a good 5-6 miles, we had people queuing outside the door for meat, for milk, for eggs, for bread, for flour, for yeast, and yeah, I even sold loo roll because, you know, people ran out. We need to go back to basics and strip it back and bare bones and the truth of our food, and we need to get that message out there, and it's so important. And the best people I talk to about the truth of their food is children. They're so bright, they get it, they are, you know, they don't care about politics. It's much easier to talk to children. They would make fantastic changes. I mean, I spoke to the previous farming minister, haven't managed to get to the new one yet. If you can get me an in, please, quite quickly. And talk to him about the DEFRA budget and the NHS budget. And the comment I got was, well, we can't tell people what to eat. Really? I think we do already, but they don't understand because they don't know the truth about food. So I'd like clear labelling, and I'd like to get the truth out there. Put the chemicals on the packets and the methods of production, and wow, then we'll have some fantastic discussions and bring that on.
Hamish?
I'd like to highlight something that I think my industry, i.e. the end consumer industry from restaurants and cafes, can continue to do. I think we are very good at kind of changing the dial on consumer trends. I mean, you know, we're a little restaurant here, and you know, I was looking back at some of the sort of things that have changed. I was interested in your conversation around, you know, trying to get people to eat butter beans and all these types of things. You know, the kind of hipster wine bars in the East End have been serving butter beans with little toothpicks with some nice olive oil put over them, and they've been doing that for 7 or 8 years. And then I read a Waitrose press release not very long ago about the sort of explosion in pulses, and you know, so I think our industry has a real role to play to kind of sort of seed those kind of initial ideas, because we're never going to make the change to get everyone to eat all those. We can come up with those trends and come up with those ideas. I mean, I had one other example which made me laugh, because I had a conversation with someone, this food thing I was at in Galway, who used to work for Heston Blumenthal, and I had a long conversation about triple cooked chips. And there was actually a Wikipedia page about triple cooked chips. You could look them up. Heston Blumenthal apparently invented that in 1995. If you go to Waitrose now, there are actually 3 different brands of frozen triple cooked chips that you can buy. So in 30 years, a chef who's come up with this one kind of slightly, you know, innovative, crazy mind guy has come up with something that's actually, you know, at the end. And I think our industry has a real role in kind of thinking really differently about how we serve food and starting those trends.
Okay, on that note, I want to open the floor up to questions. And by the way, we'll be serving dinner, so in a few minutes. Please, this lady with the t-shirt that says "Woman Up." Okay, woman up. Okay.
Like it.
Thank you. Yeah, that's for you particularly. Thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant, fascinating. But I suppose the one thing no one's really mentioned, we're talking about educate yourself and eat good stuff and whatever, but you know, if anyone's seen Kiss the Ground, and if they haven't seen Kiss the Ground, you know, in the US, 25 billion is spent every year supporting industrial agriculture. And if those farmers could get out of the industrial agricultural system, they would make 100 billion, I think it is, supposedly, between them in increased profits, or in fact, any profits. So I'd like to actually ask what you guys want this government to actually do about it, because that must be the biggest challenge. We are actually being poisoned with shit food by our own governments, and I mean, we're not in the US, thank God, but it's yeah. What should the government be doing, and how bad is our government versus the US? I suppose that's my
Not
question.
as bad as the US. Yeah, that's a very broad question, but I can give you a specific thing that we're working on that you may find interesting, which is there exists in the UK money for public money for restoring nature for good reason, but that money is not available on agricultural land. There also exists private money through biodiversity. It's 2 different things, all wilding, rewilding. There's Natural England, there's a variety of different schemes. And that money is available on non-agricultural land, but it's not available on agricultural land, whereas a number of our growers are restoring nature in the way in which they're growing food, that we're demonstrable. We continue to work with a number of research agencies, universities, demonstrating 100% biodiversity uplift, but yet none of that money is available on agricultural land, which is, we say, 75% of land. So if you're trying to restore nature, which in Josiah's lifetime has reduced by, I actually knew it was slightly higher than that, and Andy's the same age as you, he's been saying it's 70%. Yeah, which is, to put that in human terms, that's the same as every single person in North America, South America, Europe, China, and Asia gone. And Andy's a touch older than you, right? But I think that's so that our one ask of the government is to recognise that these huge swathes of agricultural land, these farmers who are incredibly resourceful people who will respond to the correct incentives, are the key to solving that and making that money available on that land.
Next question.
Can I just answer a little bit on that as well?
Okay.
To come at a slightly different angle and to think about where it is that all of this originates. And everything that we eat that's grown in a field has grown from a seed. And it's seed law and seed legislation that is a big stifle, a big barrier to agricultural change, so that farmers who want to grow crops in low input systems cannot access seeds that are suited to low input systems. And part of the problem is that the way that intellectual property that's associated with seeds has developed over the last 60, 70 years is that we've seen seeds fall into the hands of big corporations, 6 or 7 that control all seed globally pretty much. And those big corporations are all owned by agrochemical businesses. And so when they sell you some seeds to plant on your farm, they'll also sell you an agronomic package, which is a whole set of inputs that go with that. And it is really hard to break out of that. It's really hard to find seeds that are better. I'm also a member of a small organisation called UK Grain Lab, which is looking at alternative seed systems. We've got a little piece of secondary legislation through the last government to allow us to experiment with growing diverse population cereals that have this resilience that farmers need, that can be saved on farm. And we are looking at how we there's some really good reasons for seed legislation which protect farmers, but there's the perverse consequence of that is that it's allowed the domination of that sector through a few very, very big businesses.
Very disturbing. We need like a movie on that subject. Did you want to add something? I saw that you wanted to add something.
Yeah, no, a little bit. I'm going to go back to the truth, because I don't think they know the truth about food. They don't know the truth about chemicals. They're lied to all the time and they're bought. My response would be, we need to do it in spite of the government.
Yes.
We can't wait for them.
Good idea.
This is about people. We pay their salaries, whether they like it or not. We need to take back, and becoming a hippie and a bit of a revolutionary, I'm even wearing flares tonight. We've got to take control back of our food system. We really have got to take back control. Yeah. So I'm going to very slightly diverse. So and if anyone is from the FSA or an EHO, just cover your ears for a minute. We sell milk to Scotland, all right? It's illegal up there. You know, raw milk is illegal in Scotland. Okay, it's ridiculous. If you try and sell raw milk in the US, if you're in the wrong state, you're going to have a SWAT team go in and take you down. Oh my God, Scotland has got one of the highest drug issues in Europe, and they're worried about me selling a few litres of milk. The power is in the wrong place, and we need to take it back.
I love the idea of actually we should be taking control of that information instead of waiting around for it. Okay, is that oh, it's a gentleman there.
Hard to tell.
I think I'm a gentleman. Sure. Look, I love the aspiration and the positivity. I'm going to risk making myself a pariah sitting here.
It's okay.
And I'm going to caveat everything by saying I'm a trustee on the biggest agricultural charity in the country. I'm a board member of an environmental NGO, and I mentor startups that are doing some amazing innovations in the ag-food space. I'm also the former global head of public affairs for Syngenta, the largest agrochemical company on the planet.
Oh God. Okay.
So, here we go.
So it's a safe space. It's fine. Safe space.
Okay.
Winding up.
You are caveated.
So my question is, and you talked about land use. You talked about the undesirability of continuing with your large volume imports. 70% of land that's used in the UK is turned over to agriculture. We've got an increasing population. You say it's not about yield, but on some level it is kind of about yield. I love the aspiration of regenerative agriculture. I don't think organic's the answer, because you pump loads of copper onto the land. I don't think lots of heavy metal in the land's a good thing. How do we feed a growing population in the country with a decreasing amount of land without using a lot of these technologies that I've heard we don't like so much?
It's a straw man argument, though, isn't it? I mean, the argument is that we're going to continue eating in the way that we currently eat. And I know it's really difficult, but we also need a dietary shift. We can't just change what happens on farm. We need to change what happens at home, in schools, in hospitals, in restaurants. And that is a difficult process, but we have enough land to produce all the food we need. That isn't to say that we shouldn't be trading, because I think trade is a really positive thing. You'll work with coffee producers. We work with the Kaipo in the Brazilian Amazon, and we bring wild harvested Brazil nuts to the UK. That's a way that we can use our route to market to support ecosystems in other parts of the world. It's just that we do need to. The difficult truth is that Kiss the Ground, great film, we can't all eat steaks every day. That is the hard truth. And the reality is that we'll eat very, very little meat in a future that feeds the planet. And that is hard. But unfortunately, that is the reality that, in terms of the communication that needs to happen, that is what needs to happen.
Actually, there's an excellent report by the Sustainable Food Trust, which is entitled "Feeding Britain," in which have you ever accessed that? Which actually outlines how we need to change our dietary habits. But it's hardly dramatic. It's there's still a lot more. There's still quite a lot of meat, but there's a lot less chicken and pork because of the imported soy feed, and there's much more lamb vis-a-vis beef. It also asserts that we need to maintain a high level, a reasonable level of livestock, less than now, in order to continue to fertilize the land. But that's a great report, and largely, I think it would partly answer your question.
You know, it's a really, really good report. I mean, we need to, as Josiah said, we need to change our eating habits. We should not be. We have sworn at home that we will not grow an arable crop until it's something that can be fed directly to a human. Oh, just won't do it. So that is why we are pasture for life. Okay, so you have a pig and a chicken, they're monogastrics, they have to have a grain of some sort. You know, we hate food waste.
Yes.
Let's waste less food. Okay, so if food is so cheap we can throw it away, well, then I'm sorry, that the price of food is a problem. It is causing a problem. You know, our milk is $2.75 a litre. I'm not ashamed of that. Don't throw it away. Milk is one of the biggest wasted products. It's horrendous. We do need to eat differently. We need to eat, you know, eggs are really important. So let's have a dual-purpose chicken that can be for meat and for eggs. It's vertical stacking in farming terms. Let's integrate my livestock with arable. Let's just feed them in the right place. So I think, you know, the Sustainable Food Trust document is fantastic. We've got more livestock and the right sort of livestock that can sequester carbon and improve the soil going to East Anglia. I mean, you wouldn't believe the difference on our farm in the last 5 years. It's phenomenal. You know, Josiah has a fantastic phrase, which is if you can't tell a good agroecological farm when you go on it, then you have no right to be there and ask questions of certification and everything else. But we need a fully integrated food system. We need mixed farms. We need different meat. And if you're going to have a Kentucky fried something, it may as well be a really good, nutritionally dense Kentucky fried mushroom. Because apparently some of them you can't even tell the difference. So don't eat the rubbish meat, eat the good meat, eat pasture-fed meat. You know, you've got different levels of omega-3s and 6s. You've got conjugated linoleic acid. Why am I picking all the words that are really hard to pronounce tonight, honestly? Go to the Pasture for Life website and have a look. But, you know, it's proper integration and nutritionally dense food. So we're eating a lot of over-processed rubbish. It's full of calories, but there's no nutrition. So we've got to eat better, all of us, all the time.
Okay, and then I think this is an excellent moment to end the talk and thank our incredible panel of revolutionaries